21 days adrift in the Pacific Ocean, no food, no water. Just 3 tiny rafts, 8 starving men, and sharks circling below. This wasn't supposed to happen to Eddie Rickenbacker. By 1942, he'd already lived 3 impossible lives. He'd cheated death on racetracks at 130 miles per hour. He'd shot down 26 enemy aircraft over the blood-soaked skies of France. He'd survived crashes that should have killed him at least a dozen times. But now, floating somewhere between life and death in the middle of nowhere, the most decorated American combat pilot of World War I faced his greatest battle yet. And the only weapons he had were his will to survive and the same relentless determination that had carried a poor kid from Columbus, Ohio, to the absolute pinnacle of aviation history. This is the story of Eddie Rickenbacker, and trust me, you won't believe how wild this journey gets. Let's rewind to 1890, Columbus, Ohio. Eddie Rickenbacker, actually born Edward Rickenbacker with an H, came into this world with absolutely nothing going for him. His father was a Swiss immigrant who worked construction. 7 kids in the house. Poverty wasn't just knocking at their door. It was living in the basement. When Eddie was 12, everything changed. His father died in a workplace accident. Just like that, Eddie became the man of the house, 12 years old. He dropped out of school in the 7th grade and started working factory jobs, 14-hour days. The kind of childhood that either breaks you or forges you into something harder than steel. Eddie chose steel. But here's the thing about Eddie Rickenbacker that made him different. He was absolutely obsessed with speed. With machines, with anything that moved fast and looked dangerous. While other kids dreamed about safe, normal futures, Eddie was drawn to the roar of engines like a moth to flame. By his early 20s, he'd worked his way into the emerging automobile industry. First as a mechanic, then as a salesman, and then he discovered racing. Picture this, it's 1910, cars are barely reliable enough to get you across town, let alone race. The tracks are dirt ovals, tires blow out constantly. Drivers are getting killed left and right. The life expectancy of a race car driver was, let's just say, not great. Eddie didn't care. He strapped himself into these mechanical death traps and pushed them to their absolute limits, and he was good, really good. By 1914, he was racing in the Indianapolis 500. He also learned something crucial on those tracks: how to make split-second decisions at incredible speeds. How to stay calm when death was one mistake away. How to read movement and angles and trajectories faster than his competitors could think. He had no idea those skills would soon make him one of the most lethal combat pilots in human history. April 1917, America enters World War I. Eddie Rickenbacker is 26 years old, famous, and rich. He could have sat out the war comfortably. Sold war bonds, made patriotic speeches, stayed safe. Instead, he volunteered immediately. There was just one problem: the military didn't want him as a pilot. He was too old. Most combat pilots were fresh-faced kids in their early 20s. Eddie was ancient by their standards, plus he only had a 7th grade education. The Army wanted college boys to fly their planes. So Eddie did what Eddie always did. He found another way in. He arrived in France as a staff driver for General Pershing, the commander of American forces. Drove him around in a staff car and absolutely hated every second of it. He'd watch planes dogfighting overhead and feel his soul dying a little bit each day. But Eddie was persistent. He badgered his superiors constantly. Called in favors, used his fame. Finally, in August 1917, they let him transfer to flight training. Here's where it gets interesting. Remember all those years racing cars? All those split-second decisions at 130 miles per hour? All that spatial awareness and mechanical intuition? It translated perfectly to aerial combat. Eddie took to flying like he'd been born for it. He understood the physics instinctively. The way planes moved through three-dimensional space was just like cars taking turns at high speed, except with an added dimension. His instructors were stunned at how naturally it came to him. By March 1918, he was assigned to the 94th Aero Squadron, the famous Hat-in-the-Ring Squadron, the first American trained pursuit squadron to see combat. His first patrol, he nearly died. Got separated from his formation, lost in the clouds. Almost ran out of fuel over enemy territory, barely made it back. But Eddie didn't quit. He studied. He learned from the British and French pilots who'd been fighting for years. He analyzed every engagement like he used to analyze every race. Where did I make mistakes? What could I do better? How do I gain every possible advantage? And then, on April 29, 1918, everything clicked. Eddie was on patrol when he spotted a German observation plane. Alone, vulnerable. This was it. His moment. He dove on the enemy aircraft, got into position, and opened fire. The German plane went down in flames, Eddie's first kill. He'd describe later how his hands were shaking so badly he could barely land the plane when he got back to base. The adrenaline, the reality of having just killed another human being. It hit him hard, but he didn't have time to process it. Because this was the spring of 1918, and the war in the air was about to reach its most vicious, intense period. Over the next 6 months, Eddie Rickenbacker became a killing machine. He'd wake up before dawn, sometimes fly 3 or 4 missions a day. He was hunting German aircraft with the same focus he'd once hunted lap records, except now, every mistake meant death. May 17th, 2 more kills. May 28th, another one. May 30th, his 5th, making him an official ace. But here's what made Eddie different from other aces: he was incredibly analytical. Most pilots relied on instinct and aggression. Eddie combined aggression with cold, calculated strategy. He studied the sun angles, the cloud patterns, the way different German aircraft maneuvered. He turned aerial combat into a science. He also had ice water in his veins. On one mission, he was attacking a formation of German planes when his guns jammed. Both of them, he was completely defenseless, surrounded by enemy fighters. Any sane person would have run. Eddie pretended his guns still worked. He kept making aggressive moves, diving at enemy planes like he was about to fire. The German pilots, not knowing his guns were dead, kept breaking away defensively. Eddie bluffed his way through an entire dogfight and made it home alive. By September, he'd been promoted to captain and given command of the 94th Squadron. Now he wasn't just hunting Germans, he was teaching other pilots how to survive. September 25, 1918, Eddie's greatest day. He was leading a patrol of 4 planes when they encountered 7 German aircraft. The smart move would have been to stay defensive. Wait for backup. Eddie attacked. The dogfight was absolute chaos. Planes spinning, diving, climbing, tracers cutting through the air. Eddie shot down to planes himself. His formation got 3 more. They completely destroyed the German formation without losing a single American aircraft. For that action, Eddie Rickenbacker received the Medal of Honor. By the time the war ended on November 11, 1918, Eddie had 26 confirmed kills, the most of any American pilot. He'd also survived being shot down, multiple crash landings, and countless near-death experiences. He was 28 years old, a national hero, the most famous pilot in America, and he was just getting started. The 1920s and 30s were good to Eddie. He went back to racing briefly, then he got into the airline business. By 1938, he'd become president and general manager of Eastern Airlines, transforming it into one of the most successful airlines in America. He married, had 2 sons, built an empire. The American dream, right? But Eddie Rickenbacker wasn't built for peace. He was restless, opinionated. He publicly criticized Franklin Roosevelt's policies. He warned about America being unprepared for war. Some people thought he was a hero speaking truth. Others thought he was a warmonger. Then came 1941, Pearl Harbor. America was at war again. Eddie was 51 years old. Way too old to fly combat missions. But the War Department had another job for him, touring the Pacific Theater as a civilian consultant. Inspecting bases, boosting morale, delivering secret messages to General MacArthur. It was supposed to be safe, routine. In October 1942, Ed boarded a B-17 bomber in Hawaii, heading toward a tiny island called Canton for the first leg of a journey to New Guinea. 7 crew members plus Eddie. A milk run, they called it. Everything that could go wrong did. They got lost. The navigation equipment malfunctioned. They flew in circles for hours, burning fuel, desperately searching for Canton Island. It was like looking for a grain of sand in the ocean. Eventually, they ran out of fuel. The pilot had no choice. He brought the B-17 down in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The impact was violent. The plane broke apart. 1 crew member died instantly. The 7 survivors scrambled into 3 tiny life rafts before the plane sank. And then the nightmare began. No food, no water, no idea where they were. Just 3 rubber rafts, 800 miles from anywhere, drifting in the current. The sun was merciless. It cooked them during the day. At night, they froze. Their lips cracked and bled. Their skin blistered. Dehydration set in fast. By day 3, they were hallucinating, seeing islands that weren't there. Ships on the horizon that vanished when you blinked. Eddie became the leader by sheer force of will. When the younger men wanted to give up, he kept them going. When they fought over the few supplies they had, he imposed order. When despair set in, he told stories about the war, about racing, about survival. On day 8, a miracle, a seagull landed on Eddie's head. Without thinking, he grabbed it. They killed it, divided the meat, used some as bait to catch fish. It gave them just enough strength to keep going, but men were dying. 1 young airman, delirious from dehydration, drank seawater despite Eddie's warnings. He died the next day. They buried him at sea and kept drifting. Days blurred together. 10 days, 15, 20. Eddie Rickenbacker, the man who'd defied death dozens of times, who'd stared down German aces and walked away, was finally losing. His body was shutting down. He'd lost over 60 pounds. His organs were failing. On day 21, a Navy patrol plane spotted them. Pure chance, the pilot almost missed them against the glare of the ocean. 3 rafts were rescued that day. 1 raft with 2 men had drifted away days earlier and was found 6 days later. Of the 8 men who survived the crash, 7 made it home alive. Eddie Rickenbacker spent weeks in the hospital recovering. Doctors said it was the worst case of exposure and dehydration they'd ever seen someone survive. When reporters asked him how he made it, Eddie said something that perfectly captured who he was: "I just refused to die." Eddie Rickenbacker lived another 30 years after those 21 days. He returned to Eastern Airlines and ran it until 1963. He remained opinionated, difficult, and absolutely convinced he was right about everything until the day he died in 1973 at age 82. But here's what gets me about Eddie's story. This was a guy who statistically should have died about 40 different times. Race car crash, aerial combat, a plane crash in the Pacific. A commercial airline crash in 1941 that left him so injured doctors thought he'd never walk again. I didn't even have time to get into that one. And every single time he survived through pure stubbornness. He wasn't the best educated. He wasn't the most naturally talented. He didn't come from privilege or connections. What Eddie Rickenbacker had was an absolute refusal to accept limits. When they told him he was too poor to succeed, he outworked everyone. When they told him he was too old to fly, he learned anyway. When death came for him in a dozen different forms, he looked it in the eye and said, "Not today." 26 aerial victories. Medal of Honor recipient, successful businessman. Survivor of one of the most harrowing ordeals in military history. But maybe the most impressive thing about Eddie Rickenbacker was this: he was proof that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. That limitations are just opinions, that the only person who can truly defeat you is yourself. The kid from Columbus who dropped out in 7th grade became the most dangerous pilot in American skies. The race car driver became a strategic genius. The 51-year-old businessman became a survivor who refused to quit when every rational reason to give up was staring him in the face. That's not just a war story, that's not just aviation history. That's what the human spirit looks like when it absolutely refuses to break. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories from history that Hollywood couldn't make up if they tried. And let me know in the comments what moment from Eddie's life shocked you the most. The 21 days, the Medal of Honor mission. The fact that he survived all of it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.